It's strange seeing this because I never expected this.
Because 3 times we tried to take off on the plane, and the weather was dreadful. And then, of course, the 3rd time we crashed.
United were becoming the Hollywood of British football.
And you could go through all the team. I mean, they were the best team in the world.
They score 4, you score 5, they score 6, you score 10 and all like this. This is the philosophy. And they could do it, don't get me wrong, they could do it.
It was a family. There was no question that we all felt we were like brothers.
I was beginning to think, well, all these great players, have no chance.
If it hadn't been for the accident, United would certainly might have won it that year. I think they would certainly have won it that year. We were so up for it, and there was no challenge that was too big for us.
Inspired by a group of lads from their youth system, Manchester United were the shining light of British football in the 1950s. They would win back-to-back league titles and leave fans and the opposition alike shaking their heads in disbelief at their precocious talents. Their beginnings would stem from the vision of one man.
All I had, apart from playing experience, were certain ideas as to what the manager should do, faith in those ideas, and faith in the future of the club.
In 1945, Matt Busby's arrival would breathe life into a sporting giant and inspire a coaching revolution that would innovate and change the history of football forever. At the end of the Second World War, former Man City and Liverpool player, 36-year-old Sergeant Major instructor Busby returned to his beloved Manchester and began to build his dream at Old Trafford. After decades of underachieving, United needed a long-term outlook. The Reds had initiated a youth policy in 1938 with the formation of Mujak, their junior athletic club. This yielded many talents, but the Second World War interrupted its progress. Busby wanted to kick-start the most successful breeding ground for sporting talent the country had ever seen.
My first idea was to try and build on young boys, young players, and bring them up in the club atmosphere and the feeling for the club, and character-wise, and loyalty-wise.
It was very rare that you saw a 16 or 17-year-old boy in a first division side. And his idea was to build a nursery, a youth team, and fetch them up as a family.
Busby had already recruited his star maker, Jimmy Murphy. An opponent from his playing days, Busby had also witnessed his motivational capabilities whilst with the army in Bari in 1944. A fiery Welshman, Murphy would be responsible for transforming their raw skills into those of professional players that would take on the world.
Matt was in charge of the first team and my father was in charge of the coaching for everyone else and the recruitment of all the young players. So they used to start off with Bert Wally when they were 15, 16, get passed up to my father who ran the youth teams and the reserve team, and my father used to mould them into first team players.
Busby wanted to scour the back streets of Britain to find the most talented players. He'd met Joe Armstrong whilst at Man City and would eventually place him in charge of United's scouting network. Armstrong would build contacts around the country, and his natural charm and persuasion would be crucial in getting players to sign on the dotted line.
If they got hold of the mother, or he got hold of the mother, that's you were halfway there. My dad used to say, if you send a boy to school, you send him to the best school. We've got the best school. And gradually, you're able to prove it.
The elite youngsters brought in from outside the region were housed with landladies. United would be their family now. Meanwhile, Bert Wally finished his United playing career and was installed as Jimmy Murphy's assistant. Tom Curry, known to Matt Busby as the best trainer in Britain, and Bill English also formed the coaching axis on which United's playing foundations were built. The stadium's future was less certain. Old Trafford had suffered direct hits by 2 German bombs in 1941, and still needed rebuilding when Busby joined. The club was practically bankrupt, but somehow within 3 years of joining, he guided his first great team to FA Cup success.
It was unbelievable when you look back, you know, the crowd and meet the king and all this sort of nonsense. It was something special, very special.
On the 4th of May 1949, whilst Busby was building his dream, another had sadly come to an end. An air crash wiped out Italian champions Torino. They'd won 4 league titles in a row and were 4 points clear on the day of the disaster. Their English coach, Leslie Leavesley, who'd played a handful of games for United in the early 1930s, also perished. All 31 passengers on board died. In 1951, Matt Busby signed 25-year-old winger Johnny Berry from Birmingham City. Previously, Berry had tormented United, and he made an immediate impact at Old Trafford. As each bright star arrived at United, the youth team was becoming packed to the rafters. The junior players were starting to make the veterans sit up and take notice, and nobody more so than a young man from Dudley.
Then he came into the Dudley schoolboys, which he was only 11 then, and he was head and shoulders above everybody else. And you could see, you know, he's got the quality, you know, at 11-year-old.
I come from West Bromwich and we played games against him, and we knew he was already going to Manchester, and he was going to sign for him when he was a young lad, and we was all jealous of that really, because we all wanted to go to Manchester.
He had huge charisma. His charisma spread around the thing, and you felt when you were playing, if he was with you, you know, you were part of a powerful entity.
He made everybody who sort of played against him look very, very tiny and very small. Duncan was the best player I've ever seen in my whole life.
In March 1952, British European Airways' first production Airspeed Ambassador was brought into operation. The twin-engined aircraft was a versatile new passenger plane. Its high wings and large windows allowed uninterrupted views from every position in the interior. BEA named their class of ambassadors Elizabethans to honour the newly crowned Queen. It was also a breakthrough year for Matt Busby. Since he'd taken over, United had finished runners-up in the league 4 times. This time the veterans managed one final great push and lifted the trophy, ending a 41-year wait for the title. The FA Youth Cup started in the 1952-53 season. United would dominate the competition, winning for 5 successive years. They were the cream of the country's talent, steamrolling the best of the rest.
It was just assumed that we were, as a youth team, a better team than anybody else who were playing. And that was sort of instilled into you. And you always went out thinking you were going to win. And of course we never lost a game.
We were that good that I don't think I think they could have played 2 teams on the pitch at once and not beat us.
I put it all down to Jimmy Murphy and Bert Wally. The success of United youth team at that time.
They complemented each other because Jimmy was a hard man, really hard. Sometimes I ended up crying coming home from training, but determined to do better the next time. But Bert was the one who put his arm around you, pat your back and say you'll be there, and so on. And Jimmy said you won't be there unless you do as I say.
Since taking control, Busby had always given young players a chance in the first team. But as his fabulous 48ers aged, the conveyor belt of talent could not be ignored. And from 1953, the United manager decided to throw the team over to youth.
He sorted out a friendly up at Kilmarnock, pre-season friendly. But he put 3 of them in, and they came away and they drew 2-2. He was delighted. He was absolutely over the moon because these lads had done so well.
It was unheard of for young players to be given a chance against the real rough lads of the First Division. But when they went onto the field, these young lads performed miracles.
My dad, above all, was a winner. Whatever he did, he wanted to win. He wanted to be the best. And so for him, when people were coming to the team who were better than the people in before, he saw that as fantastic and a real opportunity.
I heard a story at one time, and I don't know where it came from. It was actually my father who penned the term Busby Babes. Now, whether that's true, I really don't know, but it sounds like one of the things that one of the terms he would have used. You know, he would have looked for some way of describing this particular fresh new team.
In March 1953, a vital piece of the United jigsaw was put in place. Centre-forward Tommy Taylor was signed from Barnsley, though Busby didn't want Taylor to be burdened with a large transfer fee.
I says, well, putting £30,000 on this lad said, mate, I'm under pressure. I'll give you $29,999. He says, all right, we'll accept that.
With many of the United teams still in their teenage years, the Babes were starting to challenge the league's most powerful sides for supremacy. After 1952, they finished 8th, 4th and 5th.
But when you finally saw that what was taking over was the younger players were the predominant force in the team, at 56 you knew it was coming. You could feel it.
Wherever we went, and I was only fortunate to play with them a couple of times, wherever they went, the ground was full.
The whole country then realised just what they were facing, and it was a phenomenal football team, that was.
Everything at United was now clicking into place. The best management team and scouts, the top trainers and the nation's best talent were all working towards the same goal. Busby and Murphy's alchemy was working. The final passing of the baton came in 1955 when Roger Byrne took over from Allenby Chilton and became captain.
From his early days, he matured so much. He did mature, Roger. And he actually become a very good leader, really, Roger Byrne. His early days didn't suggest that. He become a very good captain.
He did have some quite, challenging discussions, I think, with Sir Matt during his career. I think there was only ever going to be one winner, understandably. But I think he learnt from that, and I think he became a stronger person out of that and a better player. And I think that stood him in good stead for leading this young team of highly talented individuals.
Byrne was the new leader of a team on the brink of greatness. In goal, Ray Wood, the great shot-stopper signed from Darlington in 1949. Dominating defenders, Bill Folkes, a former miner from St Helens, and a giant Yorkshireman, Mark Jones. Wing halves, Eddie Coleman, a Salford lad nicknamed Snake Hips due to a body swerve that would send even the crowd the wrong way. The Dudley Colossus, Duncan Edwards. Northern Ireland's Jackie Blanchflower could play in several positions. Wingers, Johnny Barry, the oldest member of the team, a tricky and brave player. David Pegg, a Doncaster lad, quick and clever on the ball. Inside forwards, Liam Billy Whelan, a Republic of Ireland international who scored goals for fun, and a Manchester boy, Dennis Violet, a player with a razor-sharp football brain and a deadly finisher in front of goal. Tommy Taylor, a phenomenal centre-forward who scored 131 goals in just 191 games, a goal-scoring ratio with no equal at Old Trafford. A wealth of further talent including Bobby Charlton, Albert Scanlon, Kenny Morgans, Jeff Bent and Wilf McGuinness were waiting in the wings, and there were many more. The 1950s saw the breaking down of cultural barriers, the birth of the teenager. Rock and roll gripped the world, and amongst all of this, the Babes' celebrity was growing, along with Manchester's burgeoning nightlife, and nobody was more popular than the young Red Devils.
Eddie would turn up in velvet collar, 4 buttons and drainpipe trousers. But he was a great jiver, was Eddie Coleman. He was a star, and he was a cheeky chappy, lovely personality.
It was unbelievable. You go to pictures in the afternoon, and of course at the interval the lights used to go on, and you had people that used to come up for autographs.
There was a Barbers that everyone just knew as Harry the Barbers, And David Pegg, Wilf McGuinness had took David Pegg there one time for a haircut. And David Pegg looked like an old film star called Victor Mature, a good-looking fella, and everyone used to go in and say, "Can I have a David Pegg haircut?"
It just seemed to be natural for him to know exactly what to wear, and you know, we were quite flabbergasted once when he came home in a pale grey suit with a pink shirt and a pink tie, and we'd never seen anybody in a pink shirt and a pink tie before, but he looked very good in it.
Tommy was the real character of the team.
Oh yes, he was a scream of a lad, you know, and they all used to get on so well together.
When it was time for bed, Duncan would be off to bed. He was a great lad, you know, for looking after himself.
Oh yes.
He'd say to Tommy, "Go on, Tommy, you get off to bed." Tommy would say, "Howard, you get off, I'm stopping."
The young lads were the heart and soul of the new United. Their camaraderie shone through and inspired a rare passion among the Reds fans. However, the Busby Babes' greatest success still lay ahead of them, and their talents would take them to places they'd only dreamed of. European competition was a controversial topic among the English game's governing bodies. But Matt Busby saw how the future of football was unfolding. United had toured in Europe decades before, but the club's first real forays into continental competition actually began with the youth team and the 1954 Blue Stars tournament in Zurich.
I think I was 16 when I first went there. And obviously don't think I'd ever seen an airplane, or I've been in one.
And there was about 5 of us went in the cinema. The first thing the couple did was light cigarettes up, and 5 minutes later we was all out on the street.
You used to play 20-minute games each way, and then you would play the final after you played about 5 or 6 matches. You know, you played the final at about 6 o'clock in the evening, and you were flagging a little bit.
I think at that time, in the early 50s, we were still that little bit better than what they were. We were certainly more advanced than what they were, but times have changed, they've caught us up, I'm afraid.
Winning abroad made us feel, well, we're world babes, not only Manchester United babes.
In 1955, English champions Chelsea followed the advice of the football authorities and turned down the chance to enter the inaugural European Cup. But to get their chance the following season, United had to win the league.
Here at Old Trafford, it's Manchester United and the Dark Shirts kicking off in the match that should decide the league championship.
Finally, their promise had been fulfilled, and the Babes secured their first title in 1956 with a 2-1 win over Blackpool.
Blackpool and the white shirts on the attack. Beauty, who gets it across, should be a goal! And that's a goal by David Jury.
Next thing we know, we're 1 down. And Johnny Berries took a ball through. I went past the full back into the box, and I got George Farm came out, tracked around him, and he caught me, and we got a penalty.
Great chance there for Violet. This time it's a penalty.
Johnny Berry shared penalty-taking duties with Roger Byrne. Prior to the game, though, the captain had a premonition about missing a spot kick.
Roger shouts to Johnny, "You okay, Johnny?" I said, "You take it if you want." Oh, he said, "No, you take it." And Roger wasn't even facing. When the penalty was taken, he was facing his own goals, Roger. But Johnny slotted it home, and then Big Tommy got a goal in late on in the game.
United would eventually win the league by 11 points, despite the average age of the squad being only 22 at the start of that campaign. The team contained just 2 players from the side that won the title 4 years earlier. The gateway to Europe was now open, and despite the Football League's fears that it could threaten domestic competition, Busby was convinced of its value and defied the governing body's wishes. United would be England's European pioneers.
At that particular time as well, had realised how good we were. We were a good team, and we were winning regularly. And if we got the opportunity, you know, we would take some beating. But there was a lot of doubts because you didn't know who you were playing most of the time. You'd not even seen them, not even on film.
We had some weird trips. We went to Bilbao one time, and Bill Foulkes had pushed something against the heater and shut it off. And poor Mr. Hardman, who was our chairman then, was a very small man, but he was like a skeleton when he came out, and he was frozen, you know. In fact, he needed hospital. Well, he needed doctor's treatment.
And they used to worry about what they were going to eat. Some of them used to take tins of beans and things like that, just in case they didn't like the food.
When we heard about them going into these places like Spain and going into the Iron Curtain and all them places, it was just like, honestly, again, it was like what I'm saying, a voyage of Sinbad. It was like being on a magic carpet and going off. And it was brilliant.
Well, I know my mother was horrified. She saw there was going to be trouble. I don't know why, but she hated it when they got into Europe. She couldn't see any good that was going to come out of it at all. I don't know why.
United sent shockwaves around the continent, beating Anderlecht 2-0, then 10-0 at Main Road. They then narrowly defeated German challengers Borussia Dortmund before facing Atletico Bilbao in the first leg of the quarter-finals in Spain. The Reds were in danger of being dumped out of the competition.
Bilbao scored first. 2 more goals before half-time.
Until a Liam Whelan wonder goal gave them a lifeline.
What is particularly poignant about it, of course, is the picture that was taken when they were coming back from Bilbao of all the players on the wing of the plane sweeping the ice off.
In the second leg, United produced one of their greatest performances in Europe, thrashing the Spanish side 3-0 on the 6th of February 1957.
We used to feel that team could do anything. They're phenomenal, a great game that was. And that crowd that night, people in Piccadilly 3 miles away could hear the roar.
We all walked back to Manchester and it was all singing. And there was Busby's our king, Tommy Taylor, centre forward, Johnny Berwick, the wizard of the wing.
Waiting for United in the semi-finals were the mighty Real Madrid. The European champions gave them a lesson in the first leg.
Spanish hopes fluttered in the sand. But near the end, Mateos scored for Madrid and then invited the applause. So Real Madrid won 3-1. And all Britain will be cheering Manchester United at Old Trafford.
But in the return game, United were already showing signs that they were learning how to beat.
In the second leg of the European Cup semi-final. Here's Madrid on the attack. Centre forward Di Stefano shoots, but goalie Wood tips it round. And like a flash, they're up the other end with winger Copa beating Wood for a goal. When Madrid break out, inside left Real shows how it should be done. Left winger Pegg has the ball. He centres, it bounces off Taylor, and Whelan makes sure of it.
So the European dream was put on hold. But the Babes did retain the domestic league title and had the chance of a record double in the FA Cup final against Aston Villa.
Are you getting very tensed up about this Cup and League double?
No, it's not worrying. It's not worrying me anyway at all. But I don't know about some of the younger lads.
United were the youngest team ever in the final, but were dealt a decisive blow early in the game.
The ball comes from the wing to Peter McParland, who heads. Ray Wood jumps for it, and they bring each other crashing down.
After 6 minutes, goalkeeper Ray Wood suffered a broken cheekbone, following a charge by Villa striker Peter McParland. With no subs allowed, Jackie Blanchflower took over in goal, and McParland returned to haunt them, scoring 2 goals in a 5-minute spell.
Passes to McParland, and Blanchflower hasn't a chance. 1 up for Villa. A hot shot hits the post, then McParland bangs home the rebound.
Tommy Taylor soared to a trademark header, but it proved a late consolation. The Babes would have to content themselves with the league trophy. December 1957, after a patchy first half of the new season, United signed goalkeeper Harry Gregg from Doncaster Rovers for a record fee of £23,500.
So out of a world record fee, I got what was called an accrued share of benefit. I got £33. But honestly, I'd have paid £33 those days to join Manchester United. It was everybody's dream.
A squad of 42 players still contained only 4 members who had been transferred in from another club. Around Christmas, United started to regain ground in the league with wins over Leicester and Luton, a 7-2 victory over Bolton, and a cavalier 5-4 win at Arsenal. On the morning of the game at Highbury, United director George Whittaker was found dead in his room. This didn't stop United providing the last great demonstration of their genius on home soil.
What a game. I mean, 5-4. I mean, it's unbelievable. 2 top teams, 2 great defenders, and they let in 9 goals between them. It's not on.
I think it was 3-0 up. Then it went to 3 each. Then we went to 5-3. And nobody was a bit bothered. We knew they was going to win.
We went back in the dressing room half-time, and if I can remember rightly, I'd never known the manager to lose his nut. He did.
It's always easy to put these things in a package and say that was the greatest ever game and all that. That was one hell of a game.
You didn't actually believe the likes of Tommy Taylor. You didn't believe what you were watching. You didn't know how good it was.
My dad took me to Arsenal to watch the Busby Babes. It was a team that you warmed to, even though you maybe wasn't a natural supporter. You warmed to them.
I don't think if I live another 50 years, they'll never forget anything. Duncan Edwards and all that crowd. They're unbelievable.
United's second European campaign was well underway. They'd beaten Shamrock Rovers and Czechoslovakian side Dukla Prague. Bad weather in Prague ended in a problematic return journey, and United decided to charter their own plane for the next foreign encounter, a trip beyond the Iron Curtain to face Yugoslavian side Red Star Belgrade. 36-year-old senior captain James Thane would be commander of the flight, supported by Kenneth Brement, who had flown the team to Bilbao a year earlier. Both men were experienced captains in their own right, flying thousands of hours on Elizabethans and also in World War II. Raymond had been awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross after shooting down 6 enemy aircraft and a V-1 flying bomb.
Their bravery was, it was sort of their duty. There was this huge spirit, and they didn't think of death, and they just got on with it.
He had flown with Captain Thane so on many occasions, so I think they were friends. And certainly there was great camaraderie on this trip. They would have all been excited about the Manchester United football team being on board.
United had a slender 2-1 lead to protect over in Belgrade, and ahead of the trip, Captain Roger Byrne picked up a minor injury, which meant the team needed cover at left back.
During the week, he used to put a team sheet up, and then he put players that were going with them. And I was selected to go on with the team. He says, "Ronnie, come here." So I says, "What's the matter, Jim?" He says, come round here." So he took me into another room, and he says, "The boss has just been on the phone. Roger Byrne's been hurt. He's hurt his leg, and he wants Jeff Bent to go in your place." My attitude was, I'm asking for a transfer when he comes back. Of course, I never experienced anything like that again. But I was very, very disappointed. Really was disappointed.
On the coaching side, Jimmy Murphy was away in charge of the Wales national team, so Bert Whalley travelled in his place. The United Party would also draft in a diplomat from the Yugoslav embassy in London to help with the foreign customs they were about to encounter.
When we arrived in Belgrade, there were about 100 journalists and a lot of people at the old airport welcoming the Manchester United. It was a great event in Belgrade. Already fans were marching up and down the streets carrying flags and singing and shouting.
Pre nego što smo mi odigrali tu utakmicu, mi smo znali da su postale Busbyjeve bebe i da su to bili stvarno izuzetno veliki igrači, vrlo mladi, veliki talenti, ali se vidjelo da su to igrači koji su bili obučeni i koji su imali jednu veliku fudbalsku disciplinu.
A minimum of 80% of the public were dressed in military uniform. The pitch was marked in red because of the snow on the ground.
And they were very efficient players, and they had a volatile crowd as well.
I don't think they had lost for a long time, and we just played out our skin.
United charged aggressively into the contest, and Dennis Viollet, who averaged nearly a goal a game in Europe, fired them into the lead after only 2 minutes.
I took it and I got about 20-25 yards out, and I thought, well, if you strike this, the goalkeeper's going to find it really difficult. And I hit it and it flew past it. And I think that made us 2 up, 3 up at half time. And then we started cruising. We started cruising and got ourselves in all sorts of trouble.
Kažem, tako su nas brzali i tako su nam lako dali 3 gola da i dan danas ne mogu da se osvestim i da se prisjetim toga sve kako tako munjevito to je desilo.
And then the referee had a brainstorm, and he was giving free kicks, he even gave penalties.
Utakmica drugo, sa Englezima kada se igra, to se zna da se tu ide do granice fair playa. To je tipično za engleski fudbal da ta granica ne prelazi.
The referee gave him a penalty to put him back in the game, and nobody could believe it. He just fell down.
I spent a large part of the game not fighting, getting punched by media, cameramen getting punched and fighting back with them at the back of the goals in the second half. I had my attention drawn by that.
U toku utakmice nekoliko puta i vodstvo gde su stvarno mogli da i ostvare pobedu. Međutim, na toj utakmici nismo se nijednog momenta predavali. Mislim da je to bila jedna izuzetno...
Suddenly we were with about 5 minutes to go, they equalised and we were really pushed.
We were in the next round then, so we were over the moon.
It was a great result.
After demonstrating the grit to match their flair, the Babes were through to the semi-finals for the second successive year. They were going well in the FA Cup. Their form in the league had picked up. All that was left to do was to celebrate victory and make the journey back to Manchester, with a vital game against table-topping Wolves waiting for them. Sadly, many of them would never see home again. The morning after celebrating a hard-earned victory in Belgrade, United boarded flight 609, due to arrive back in Manchester at 6 o'clock that evening. Captain Thane had flown the 2 legs of the outward journey, so it was agreed that Captain Raymond would operate the return flight, standard practice for 2 such experienced pilots.
I was going into the semi-final of the European Cup for the first time in my life. They were going into it for the second time. When I say they, the club prior to my time, you don't need to explain the euphoria and the feeling of young men, some with sore heads and some without. And the same applied to the press. And I'm saying this not in a derogatory way. We had the best of the English press with us.
I mean, everybody was laughing and playing cards, and it was great. And when we came down to the airport in Munich, it was cold and snowing.
Weather was bad, and there was snow on the runway, and they didn't have the facilities that they have these days, you know.
As the plane descended, Captain Raymond switched on the plane's de-icing equipment. Air was heated to over 70 degrees Celsius and circulated around the wings. The Lord Burleigh landed at Munich Airport at 17 minutes past 1 in the afternoon and then switched off its engines for a scheduled refueling. At 2:30 p.m., with the wings still warm and having received clearance for takeoff, the plane began rolling on its first attempt.
You could hear the engines revving and getting really loud, and then he put his brakes on.
A second attempted takeoff was aborted at 2:35.
We set off again and we went much, much further, and the wheels were making a big bow wave, like a boat in the bow. But the second time, the bow wave was much, much bigger.
I felt it, you know. What the hell?
Well, we made 2 attempts before the fatal run, and on both of these occasions we had this boost surging, which was not terribly serious, but it was something that one ought to really do something about. And I abandoned the first takeoff and got permission to turn around on the runway and make another attempt. And this fault came out again, and at that stage I decided to go back to the tarmac to discuss it with the engineer.
The boost surging was a familiar problem in the Elizabethan aircraft. It was more acute at high-altitude airports like Munich, although both pilots agreed theoretically it wouldn't reduce their takeoff power. Fresh snow was now falling on the runway, and Duncan Edwards, for one, thought he would be staying the night in Munich. He sent a telegram to his landlady in Manchester.
I know that some people thought that there was a possibility of night stopping or going back by train, but it certainly hadn't crossed my mind at the time.
I don't think anybody was particularly worried. If anybody was worried, they would have said so.
Tommy Taylor happened to be passing by, and he said to me, I hope this time they will have, they will look into it properly.
The plane would then make its third and fatal takeoff attempt. The pilots and ground crew once again surveyed the wings and saw no reason for them to be de-iced. At 3 minutes past 3, the plane started rolling. 1 minute later, it would end in disaster.
And he took us out a third time, and then all hell broke loose after that.
Strapped in the back seat was Tom Cable, and that's when I thought, here, he's terrified.
Some of the boys got into the plane and they swapped seats. They went at the back.
We started off down the runway, and I looked across diagonally at Roger, who was not a good flyer. And Roger was a very worried fella, and into myself, it's hard to describe unless you're a card, I thought he's more frightened than I am.
And I can remember somebody saying, we might crash this third time, and Bill Whelan, who was a little bit religious, Bill said, well, I'm ready for it.
I watched and watched and watched the bow wave of snow and watched out the window and knew we'd gone a lot further than we'd gone the first 2 times.
And we got to that point on the runway, which we know as V1, which I suppose you might say is the point of no return. And at this point, the aircraft ceased to accelerate. And then Captain Raymond called out, "Crash, we won't make it."
We ran through the outer fence, and then everybody knew that this was not normal.
We started skidding, and the lights went off in the plane.
We came down. We bounced once, twice, 3 or 4 times. We bounced.
I thought I'm going to get killed.
And that was it. Everything went black.
The plane had burst through the airport's perimeter fence, collided with a house just outside the airport, then hit a tree. 100 meters on, it smashed into an oil compound and a truck loaded with drums of fuel. The Lord Burleigh, which was carrying 1,000 gallons of fuel itself, slithered on for another 70 meters until coming to a standstill.
And I started to crawl slightly upwards towards the piece of light. I looked out through the hole and I saw Bert Wally.
I was practically naked. The explosion, or whatever you can call it, had taken off my shoes and my clothes, and there was only belt left with some sort of parts of my trousers.
And in the distance I saw the radio operator, a fellow called Rogers, Peter Howard, Ted Elyard, and the two stewardesses. And they were running through the snow and they shouted, "Run, run, run."
And I got out quickly. I got out down the side, there wasn't anything on the right, so I got out there. And I made a 20-hour, I never run so fast in my life when I went down there.
I stood there, and just with that, the captain of the plane came around the side of the plane, and I repeat, a very brave man. He had a tiny little fire extinguisher, which you would see in the car today, and he shouted to me, "Run, you stupid bastard, it's going to explode."
I think I was the only one who was in that position, to be able to stop and look and see the whole picture. Oof.
And I heard a baby crying. And I shouted to the people, "Come back, there's people alive in here."
Harry Gregg had appeared and was stood there with his arms out shouting, come on lads, where are you all, where are you all?"
And I found the baby, and I come out and I ran afterwards, and the man Rogers was shouted, and he came back to meet me. I gave him the baby, I found the mother found me, and she was in a very, very bad way. And when I say I kicked her in the middle of the back out through the aircraft.
I saw Harry Gregg coming out of this inferno, practically. A very brave man came out carrying this baby in his arms and handed it over to Vera Lukic.
The crew and survivors would now battle together to help those that could be saved.
I went back round inside again, and I found Albert Scanlon and Ray Wood. I tried to pull them out, and they were both trapped. They were dead as far as I was concerned. I come round what was left of the wing on that side of the plane, and Bobby Charlton and Dennis File were lying half in, half out of where the 6-seater card school would have been.
But I was still fastened into my seat, and when I woke up, I thought I'd just opened my eyes. I thought I just closed my eyes, you know. And then afterwards, Harry and Bill Folks said that I'd been about quarter of an hour unconscious. And in that time, they'd been going in and helping the others, you know.
I could still walk towards the plane, and I saw on the ground the unfortunate Tommy Cable, who swapped seats with me.
Matt Busby was quite near to me, and he was sitting in a pool of water, and I took my coat off, and because he was obviously seriously injured, but I thought, well, at least he didn't have to sit in a pool of water, you know. So I put my coat underneath him, yeah.
Es war ein furchtbarer Schreck, dass man irgendwas denkt hätte, überhaupt nicht, kann man nicht. Wir waren vor einer Ruine gestanden, wir hat nichts mehr gesehen. Wir hat die Leute, wir hat gar nicht gewusst, wo man zuerst helfen sollte.
What was left of the aeroplane was a badly damaged cockpit, a small galley, and what we call, being clever now, the trailing edge of the wing. There was nothing else left.
They're to be thanked, Harry Gregg and Bill Folks, because I don't know if I would have been brave enough to actually do that. But it was, it meant, in a way, you thought, well, maybe football's not the be and end all of everything, you know.
One of the pilots, Kenneth Raymond, was still trapped inside the cockpit.
Und bei Captain Raymonds Befreiung, da war noch ein Mann dabei, das ist auf dem Foto zu sehen, aber wir wissen nicht, wer das war. Das muss ein Amerikaner gewesen sein. Und Mehr auf dem Cockpit war kein Platz. Also mehr konnten gar nicht helfen dann. Ich habe halt versucht, das Bestmögliche, den Captain frei zu bekommen, damit er rauskam. Das hat natürlich eine Zeit gedauert dann. Das ging nicht so schnell.
Although they managed to get him out in one piece, he really was badly injured and lapsed into a coma that night, never to recover.
The dead and survivors were gradually being taken from the scene to the wrecked Der Isar hospital.
A man turned up in a van, an old van, with a side door. And we started to put people in, ordinary people put people in.
Strange enough, a German was sitting opposite of us in this lorry. And on the journey to the hospital, he looked at us and laughed. Was it a nervous reaction on his part? I believe it must have been. But Bobby was upset and he wanted to find this man. He said, "Why are you laughing? What is so funny?"
We headed through the snow and through the streets, and Bill kept punching the head, and I mean physically punching the head of the driver because of the skidding. And he was petrified. He kept reaching over Dennis and punching the driver and telling him to stop. And in fairness to the driver kept going.
I went back to the hospital, saw him having a look at people and see who survived. And I was surprised there weren't as many survived as I thought.
The hospital, headed by Professor Maurer, implemented their emergency plan. Teams of doctors, nurses, surgeons, specialists, and even medical students were drafted in to help. The expertise of Maurer and all his staff would save many lives.
They then took Bobby Charlton, Bill Folks, and myself. Some nuns took us away from where we were. I started to cry when I heard over the tannoy, Frank Swift. All I heard was Swift. Kaput.
We were in a waiting room. I remember it clearly. And I think I had concussion, something, and I'd had a few little cuts on my head and whatever. But I started ranting and raving at this poor lad. And then they came up to me and they gave me an injection in my neck, and I didn't remember anything till the following morning.
Although I was in war and was wounded in war and saw a lot of, but this surpassed in horror anything that I experienced in my partisan life.
Back home, the terrible news began to break.
Suddenly, you just got the sense, word went round the office that something major was happening. It was a big story.
There was a knock on the door. He was the local journalist for the local newspaper, and he just said, "We've heard on our cable that there's been an accident."
My mother came running out the house and called me in, shouting at me to come in. I thought, what have I done wrong?
I heard this man shouting, plane crash, and I said to my wife, "What's he shouting plane crash for?" She says, "Oh, it's probably been an aeroplane crash." She said, "There's an airport outside,
So the editor, because the evening paper was coming to a close then, said, "Right, I want the office cleared, except for," and he named a few people, senior people, to bring out a special edition during the evening. By this time, people were gathering outside the office on Cross Street, waiting for news.
I think my mother actually found out on a sandwich board outside the shop and headlines, and rushed home and obviously phoned the club and got the bad news he was one of them missing or killed.
So we had to wait until the evening for the evening news.
Here is the news. So far, we know there are 23 survivors after Manchester United's air crash at Munich this afternoon.
And then it struck me very vividly. I thought, God, no. Last I thought was a plane crash. So in my John Little office there, I went in, I cried myself for 20 minutes, couldn't realise it. Heartless players you brought up, more or less lived with. Very difficult.
Yes, my reaction was a scream. I can hear it now when the news came over the phone. And then really and then that's all I can remember of that particular day. It was horrendous.
I got a phone call and I went in and it was Jimmy Murphy. And he says, Christy, I said, yes. He said, we've bad news, he says. You heard, you know what? I said, yes. He said, we've bad news. He said, Liam didn't survive it. He says, from what's left here in Old Trafford, he says, we send our sympathies.
And my dad's name didn't come up as being alive until about 10:30 at night. So she was there from 4 o'clock, not knowing. I mean, they still hadn't struck me. The enormity of it still hadn't struck me. And it was, for her, it was awful.
That evening, my mother put me to bed, and during the evening, she had a visitor, a lady who said she was from British European Airways with news of my father, and that my father had been killed in the crash, and that actually he deserved to die because he'd been partly responsible for all of the players' death. As it turned out, that wasn't true, but that was the news that my mother had that evening.
Late that night, we were made go to bed to lie down. So we lay down, and my mother said, when she had gone up, the police had come to give us official notice that he was dead. So I was up and I was lying on the bed, and she said, Christy, I said, yes. She said, if he was dead, she said, shouldn't the police come to notify us? And I said, they were here, ma'am.
A policeman came, and he was obviously a very, I don't know what his name was, couldn't remember, I never remembered his name, but he was obviously a very high-ranking police officer because he had a load of gold braid on his shoulder, and he just came and said that David had died in the crash, and what did we want doing with his body? We were just devastated.
The city of Manchester was in mourning. A nation was bereaved.
I was just so bloody sad to think that within the next few weeks or even months, you wouldn't see half them again. It was so sad.
Got on the bus, went home straight to St Patrick's, and I must have sat in there for about an hour and just cried and cried and cried, you know, because they were my idols.
It was a nightmare, and the shock of it all, you felt as though you were in a fog.
It was one of the worst moments of my life. It's like when my dear old mother died, you know, it was the same kind of sadness as that, you know, and it was terrible.
At the crash scene, one person remained alive and as yet undiscovered.
9 o'clock in the night, 2 German reporters went back to the plane to look for something, and I was still in there. They got a phone up for an ambulance to pick me out. They could see my white shirt. I was breathing in amongst all the burning cases in it. And I was still there. I was last to come out.
The German investigator arrived even later in the evening, 6 hours after the crash. He quickly drew conclusions about the causes of the disaster.
I'm aware that he went to the aircraft and just started walking around, nothing more than that. There was a little bit of light from arc lights from the cameraman and a little bit of headlight from emergency vehicles, but it didn't appear to be a particularly in-depth investigation. I got the feeling that perhaps he was looking for any ice on the wing that might have supported his idea. But he also wanted to get rid of the wreckage very quickly afterwards.
Nein, es war kein Eis drauf. Da hat es ziemliche Probleme gegeben deswegen. Ja. Weil nämlich Flughafen hat ja behauptet, dass die Maschine wäre vereist gewesen.
We had a call, the hotel people were great, to say that early hours of the morning that the remainder of the crew had come back. And we went down to their room or quarters, and I argued with the pilot who remained, Captain Thane. And I said, I watched the undercarriage come up, which I did. I watched the undercarriage and I thought, we're up, no problem. And he explained flying to me for the first time to an Irishman. He explained flying.
In the Munich hospital, the survivors were starting to discover the full horror of what had just happened.
The following morning, there was a young lad in the same room as me, and he had a paper, and he told me all about, you know, this is the accident and what have you. And he didn't speak English really, but he was gesturing. And then I went through the list of players in my mind, and he just told me yes or no if they were alive or dead. But which was really, it was a killer, really.
On the 7th of February, Jimmy Murphy and the families were flown out to Germany.
Jimmy asked us twice to go back to the hospital. Jimmy Murphy asked Bill and myself to get back so that people would see us and not realise how bad it was. And we followed Professor Moore around the beds to everybody, including Duncan, Albert, everybody concerned. And he gave to Jimmy his opinion, like 50-50, strong boy. The boss, Matt Busby, strong man, 50-50. And sadly, Duncan, strong boy, 50-50. Johnny Berry, his words were, I knew what his words were, I'm not God.
I remember vividly, on the left was the pilot, who was well, his dear wife sat with him, unconscious. Across from him was Matt in oxygen tent. So I went across there, lifted up the flap of this tent effort, and he just turned his head and he said, "Oh, it's you, Jimmy." And he said, "Keep the flag flying." Yeah.
I used to climb the stairs to get away from everybody, and I'm climbing up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stories, and I got to the corner and I heard this crying, and looked round the corner. I don't even like saying it now. And Jimmy Murphy was sitting there, crying his eyes out.
The bodies were flown back to Manchester. The city that had cheered on the young heroes now wept as they returned.
I have never, ever experienced anything like it in my life, then or since. There must have been 100,000 people, half of them on their knees, pouring down with rain. It was unbelievable.
For weeks after, you had Man United supporters. They were all crying, literally crying. Couldn't believe it.
The coffins came back from the crash, and we helped to carry them and put them in the old gymnasium at the side, and they were in the gymnasium at the side, and well, we were training sort of 50 yards away from that. You know, it was a very, very strange experience.
But I do remember Liam Whelan's funeral coming back into Dublin and stopping at Home Farm. And there with my father explaining to me the significance of it. And I've never forgot that. And like so many other Irish people, you became instant supporters of Man United.
We lost so many mates. Never forget that.
It was a horrible time. Horrible time.
On February the 10th, the Lord Mayor of Manchester officially launched a disaster fund which would eventually raise over £50,000, with donations from around the country and even from the inmates of some of the country's prisons. Harry Gregg and Bill Foulkes returned to Manchester by ferry and train with Jimmy Murphy. The three of them would play a vital role in the immediate future of the club. The next football fixtures saw a minute's silence at grounds around the country. Journalists too wore black ties in memory of their colleagues, including former Man City star Frank Swift. Manchester's and the nation's footballing writing establishment had been lost.
I think people have to remember that there were as many journalists killed on that plane as there were players, and sometimes, I'm not saying people forget that, but it's not obvious to them, and I suppose that puts everything into perspective in a way, in terms of how people are viewed, maybe from an importance point of view.
21 people had been killed, with several more critically and seriously injured. One of these, Matt Busby, had doubts over his future in football.
I remember my first reaction was never to have anything to do with football again. And this was my mind and my mind. And my wife went again, come along one of these days and said, if these boys had their say that it's passed on, they would want you to carry on.
With Busby convalescing, the club would somehow have to find the strength to carry on. It was left in the hands of a man stricken with grief, but determined to salvage its future.
No one realised I went through hell, come back, and had no one to talk to, really. Plenty of people around, but I'm talking at my 11 in soccer. I had to find a team of 11.
I was a 15-year-old at the time. I didn't really recognise stress and pressure. But in later years, you can't understand what the man must have gone through with all these young players dying, going to their funerals, going to Bert's funeral, and having to deal with selecting a team, getting a team, and getting on with a job that he didn't want, really. If you'd offered my father a manager's job, he'd have probably turned you down.
Les Olive was the assistant secretary, 28 years of age. He was a young man, and he suddenly thrust into dealing with the crash, with the aftermath, with the families, with the authorities, with trying to get a game on, with no staff.
Ernie Taylor, who was the end of his career, he came from Blackpool, and he smoked like a trooper, and he had a drink as well. But a brilliant man to have around the place, talking and patting us on the back and encouraging everybody. A lot of players came, but he was the one who stood in my mind, you know, of somebody who helped tremendously.
Along with Taylor, Bishop Auckland loaned 3 of its amateur England internationals to help bolster the ranks.
Jimmy Murphy knew me from my training days down there, and I was down at Old Trafford, strange enough, looking at the coffins in the gymnasium, and Jimmy asked if he could have a word with me, and before I left, so I went to see him in his office, and he just said that would it be possible if I could bring a couple of players and myself to play in the second team and give them a little while to recover their composure, as it were.
I remember this togetherness, really, like everyone, like even the boys who weren't playing in the team, everyone wanted them to win. They wanted them to do well, you know, in all aspects of it. So there was no animosity from anyone who wasn't picked to play in the team. Everyone was behind all the boys who were selected and that, you know.
Former United goalkeeper Jack Crompton returned from Luton Town to help fill the coaching void left by Bert Wally.
Driving into Manchester, you could sense the atmosphere. You know, it was just like a wake. And the club realised then we've got to get them out. And we went to the Norbreck at Blackpool and lived there for 3 weeks to get them out of this atmosphere of Manchester till some of the funerals were over. And it was really, really depressing.
Only 13 days after the crash, Harry Gregg was starting goal and Bill Foulkes would captain United for their first game against Sheffield Wednesday. The Football Association gave special dispensation for the Reds to sign cup-tied players. Aston Villa's Stan Crowther joined just before the kick-off. He was put straight into the side. The match programme that night evidence of how great the struggle was to put a team together.
I played with players that night against Sheffield Wednesday that I had never, ever met.
We're going to do our best, because nobody gave us a chance, nobody gave us an earthly chance.
There was no cards or anything on the coach that day. It was just everybody looking out the window, you know. It was like, just like as though you're going to a funeral, you know.
We had enough inspiration. The crash was enough inspiration.
Everybody's mind was set.
we're going to win this.
It was then the issue, I think, that when they came out, those lads weren't there. They were, you know, it was Manchester United, but dead gone. Would we ever see the likes again, you know?
And my noise, oh, that was fantastic. Running down there, oh.
It was all that the other lads were there helping them. I mean, it was amazing that Bill Folks played and Harry Gregg. They came out and did the stuff.
If you had a loss with your family, that's the time when everybody comes together as a show of strength and belief in the future, and that's what it was.
Billy Fuchs wins the toss for Manchester United against Sheffield Wednesday, and it's the most dramatic game Busby's Babes have ever played. Wednesday and the striped shirts kick off. Less than a fortnight after the Munich air crash, the Babes are fielding a scratch side for a 5th round FA Cup tie. Brennan takes the corner, and it's in! Rebounds, but Seamus Brennan's there to land a beauty. 20-year-old Brennan was only included a few hours before the match. 17-year-old Mark Pearson has the ball. Alec Dawson's ready to receive, and there's number...
Actually, when you come to think, I don't think we wanted to win. You can't say that because, like, you know, you do want to win, but you know, you want to like to see them being pushed further down, kind of thing, you know, than what they were at that particular stage, you know. And I'm just glad it happened as it did anyway, you know.
They're smiling, but you know, it was just relief, I think.
Look at my eyes and look at Bill Folks' eyes. I think they speak for themselves.
On the 21st of February, with the club still engulfed in grief and with fixtures now ongoing, came another devastating blow.
By the time we got there, it must have been 8 or 9 in the evening. Of course, there was no visiting by that time. Find a hotel. We went in to see the lads the next morning and greeted with the news that Duncan had died that night.
I think the doctors came down and told us.
You must have found that devastating as well.
Yeah, we couldn't believe it. It's just sad. He'd have been a real star today.
For 15 days, Duncan had bravely fought for his life. He had less than 5 full seasons at the top, but a lifetime's worth of achievement.
In a way, he was my first hero, really, and I learned a lot from him, probably more than any other player, really.
If Duncan Edwards was here now at age 18, the first name on the team sheet would be Duncan Edwards.
We never saw the best of Duncan because he was so young when this tragedy happened, and he was a great player and had a wonderful future in front of him, and of course it was taken away at a very early age.
Take the best out of, say, Roy Keane, Brian Robson, Stephen Gerrard, Fabregas, all rolled into one without any bad temper or anything. That was Duncan Edwards.
Bobby Charlton was preparing to make his comeback, but like other survivors, found returning to Old Trafford very difficult.
But it wasn't the same fun anymore, I must be honest. You know, it became work rather than pleasure, really, football. Although later on, you know, as time goes by, you do tend to deal with it more easily.
I just played because I thought it might be the same as being in the team with the rest of the boys, but it wasn't the same. I mean, it wasn't like a dream team. I had lost that extra yard, and I didn't care whether I played in reserves or the first team.
On the 1st of March, Charlton did return, and United faced West Brom in the quarter-finals of the FA Cup.
They drew the first game, but we thought we could win the second game When you went out, it was inside you could feel, you know. You were sort of trembling when you went out on the pitch. The occasion was so important. And when the other lads come out who was in the disaster, you looked at them and you felt, blimey, they must feel terrible now, trying to play today against us. But they lifted themselves and they played tremendously well. In the end, I didn't feel sorry for our side. I thought, well, it's a good thing for them to have won, and let's hope they win the cup.
Days later, Matt Busby sent a message home with the man who fought to save the lives of so many.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am speaking from my bed in the Iser Hospital, Munich, where I have been since the tragic accident of just over a month ago. You will be glad, I am sure, to know that the remaining players here and myself are now considered out of danger.
Support for United had now reached fever pitch. In the semi-final of the Cup, it was second division Fulham who were the underdogs. Bobby Charlton saved United's Cup run with 2 goals. That would mean a replay at Highbury, and the pressure would tell on Fulham's goalkeeper.
And a goal by Dawson.
I can tell you that Elio Messina, our goalkeeper, who actually really took us to the semi-final, through quite absolute outstanding displays throughout the round, had a nightmare.
And a goal! Oh, and what a day Macedo is having. And it's a goal, another mistake by
For United, Alex Dawson will be the hero this time, with a semi-final hat-trick, a feat that hasn't been repeated in 5 decades.
They're going in quickly, but shot's been charged down to Macedo, and there it is. And that's finished it. Charlton has scored.
For them to get into the final was probably a lot of justice behind it. You know.
Whilst United were performing miracles in the FA Cup, the official West German inquiry into the crash began. International aviation law dictated that the German authorities would institute and control the inquiry.
It was an inquiry and not a court of law. This would mean that you could bring what evidence you wanted to the inquiry, and you could almost dictate the direction in which it would take.
Vermutlich nicht ins Konzept gepasst hat. Ich vermute, es ist nur eine Spekulation, eine Versicherungssache.
And my father always did think that was absolutely ridiculous, and he said, well, there were rescue services, photographs of people climbing on the wings, even late into the evening, because the crash happened in the afternoon. Even late into the evening, there were people walking on the wings, and it had been snowing and it was freezing cold. So his opinion was there was no way that it was ice on the wings.
The way that the pilot was treated, in fact the 2 pilots was treated, was incredible. These were 2 men that had fought in the Second World War.
There was no ice. There was none reported, none seen. I don't understand how we've come to this conclusion of ice on the wing.
Despite evidence to the contrary, the German inquiry ruled that ice on the wings had been the major cause of the crash. The next 11 years of Captain Thane's life will be dedicated to proving his innocence and that of the crew, but he would face almost insurmountable odds in proving his case. On March the 18th, the body of Kenneth Raymond was flown home. The final death toll was 23.
On reflection, now, I can say it was a godsend. It's difficult to say that, but he wouldn't have had a happy life. He would have had probably the mental age of a 5-year-old, from what I've been told later.
After 10 weeks, Matt Busby says goodbye to the Rex Deiser Hospital in Munich, and to Professor George Maurer, that friendly and brilliant doctor, to whom Matt and his fellow survivors probably owe their lives.
United were in the final of the FA Cup. Dennis Viollet had returned 2 weeks earlier, and waiting for them at Wembley was a powerful Bolton Wanderers side.
One fella came and he says, what do you think? I said, well, unfortunately, I said, I think we're odds on. I mean, it was a patched-up team, weren't it? I mean, they hadn't been playing together long.
After being on the brink of quitting the game he loved, Matt Busby was able to join Jimmy Murphy on the Wembley bench. But Jimmy led the side out, a fitting honour for a man who had guided United out of the shadows of despair.
Holden takes it, it's headed out and Ray Parry brings it back. He centres but Stan Crowther's there. He clears but Edwards returns it and Lofthouse runs in for a lightning goal.
The first Nat Lofthouse goal came after only 3 minutes. The second one would live on in the memories of those involved.
But Nat Lofthouse charges in and there's...
I tried to help it over the bar. It stood up in the air. I should have caught it, or should have attempted to catch it, or done one thing properly. Stood up in the air. I had still plenty of chance to recover. I turned around and caught it, and Nat charged me fair and square in the shoulder.
Well, I always said to Harry after, you were just trying to swank a little bit, Harry, weren't you? Just knock it up and then bring it down. But I said, there was a lion at the side of you, which they always called him that, didn't they? Oh, of course it was a foul.
It should have been a free kick, really. It was a free kick, but it's. I think we just looked on our side, I suppose you can say.
They beat us 2-0, and but at the end of the day, I think that the result really was incidental.
They'd lost some of the best players and the greatest players, but they hadn't lost the spirit. That was what carried us through, the spirit. And of course we had Jimmy Murphy, he was absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. It's a good job they had him here. I've always said this, and I told his son when Jimmy died, and I said to him, if your father hadn't been here at the time, or he'd have gone and got killed, this club wouldn't be where it is today. And I mean that.
Only the European Cup semi-finals remained. They beat AC Milan 2-1 in the home game, but lost 4-0 in the return leg at the San Siro. In May, Johnny Berry, who was still recovering from his severe injuries in a Manchester hospital, picked up a newspaper for the first time.
And the doctor came in. Dad just got the paper. What's going on? You know, what's going on? And he said there's been a crash. He said, oh no, was it a car crash? He said, no, a plane crash. And he said, was anyone hurt? And he said, yeah, unfortunately people were hurt. And so he went through the team, and Dad called out a name and he said whether they were alive or whether they were dead. And so ironically, he'd been on the plane, but he must have been the last person in Britain to know of the plane crash.
The season that had promised everything and very nearly took it all away was over.
Paid the cost to be the boss.
Matt Busby was back, and with Jimmy Murphy in the summer of 1958, began to rebuild his squad. Albert Quixel signed for a British record £45,000, and he formed part of a new forward line along with Albert Scanlon, Warren Bradley, Dennis Viollet and Bobby Charlton. In the campaign directly after the tragedy, United finished second in the league, inspired in part by Charlton's career-best 29 goals. The youth system continued to yield a wealth of talent, and several key signings were made to help them along. Within 5 years of the tragedy, they'd lifted silverware again, defeating favourites Leicester City in the 1963 FA Cup final. Best, Law and Charlton were now drawing the crowds in, accompanied by Credden, Styles, Kidd et al. 2 league titles followed in 1965 and 67, but they were still chasing the European dream. In 1968, with the game's ultimate club prize once again so tantalisingly close, United found their inspiration.
Gorgeous pass, you know, just off the ground. The right height and right speed. So I just sort of directed the ball right into the bottom corner. And beat him easily. For Bill to score that goal and put us into the final, and then to go to the final, and Bobby Charlton's your captain, and scores 2 goals. So, you know,
it was just, I think we were destined to win it that year.
Going out on the park and all that, it's things you go through you. You know, you say, you know, well, you know, you always say a little prayer before you go out, you know, and that. And so you say a little prayer for, you know, we want to do it for the Babes.
I think if you went to every supporter that was inside Wembley Stadium that evening, they'd probably have the same thought in their mind. We've got to win it because of what happened in the past. I would think, without question, that was in every player's mind as well.
The families and survivors of 58 watching on in the stands, the team did them proud.
He simply walked the ball into the net. Watch this fantastic goal.
This was all for what had happened at Munich, and you know, obviously we didn't want that to happen, but you know, we'd done it for them, and that was the greatest thing about it.
I saw it really as a big thank you, you know, a big thank you to all the players that were not with us, and some of the players that were injured. In fact, even the players that survived, you know, it was something special to win the European Cup.
In 1969, Captain James Thane was finally cleared of blame by a second British inquiry. New and significant evidence and witnesses came to the fore, proving beyond doubt there was no ice on the wings. Sloshed shore water on the runway had prevented the aircraft from reaching the speed and angle necessary for takeoff.
He was so relieved to find that there were people out there who had evidence, first-hand evidence, that would support exactly what he had said, and not just those who the investigator had called upon.
Und zweitens hat vermute ich, durch den Widerstand der Reifen hat an Geschwindigkeit verloren.
As experienced as they were, they didn't go out to commit suicide. They really genuinely thought that everything was okay. And they were unlucky. It was going to happen eventually. If it didn't happen then, it was going to happen the next day, or next week, or next month, or whatever.
As a result of the accident and of Thane's own investigations, priceless research was undertaken studying the effects of slush on runways, doubtless preventing another tragedy. For Thane, though, the fight for the truth had taken its toll.
Well, I'm very proud of him from what I've heard, that he actually went back, pulled out survivors, took a lot of effort to do this. He must have been very brave, but having said that, it's nothing that people wouldn't do. You help. Well, if there's a real problem, you help.
And to know that he did do his duty, that he was involved in the rescue, that I'm proud of what he did. And I think he was proud too of also what he did, that when something terrible happens, he didn't run away, he got stuck in, and he did his best to help the other people there.
50 years later, how would you like your father to be remembered?
As a person who very much enjoyed what he did, loved his flying, loved life, had, like so many people, fought through a terrible war, but had survived. And wished he could have been around to help Jimmy.
You could say, arguably, he was the 24th victim.
The severity of Johnny Berry and Jackie Blanchflower's injuries was such that they would never play again. The crash had left an indelible mark on the club and all the families affected.
He was unaware that she was going to have a child, and they'd obviously planned to have a family. So I think to have me as the focus of the family's attention probably helped.
My mother sadly passed away in December of last year, but she never ever got over it, even to this day. In fact, she's been buried with my dad in the same grave. A love that would never die.
now we've got my grandson born on that day. We've got that as a memory, and that's great, that, because it means that the 6th of February will never disappear from our memories.
It was his life. He loved United. He really did. He'd have done anything for them. He would never be given to any kind of misery or sulks or depression, never. He just sailed through his life with his head held high. He was a wonderful man.
My father was a very good Christian, and I know that he believed that when he died he'd be, you know, it wasn't the end of everything. So, I mean, I just know that I'll see him again.
In a short space of time, the Busby Babes' achievements granted them immortality. They changed perceptions of how the game should be played, broke down barriers for younger players and for teams with European ambitions. For United, their cavalier play and faith in the youth system would provide the blueprint for future successes.
They played with great courage. You know, you hear stories about Eddie Coleman being a brash Salford lad, you know, demanding the ball and beating 3 and 4 players and no care about the game. You know, just give me the ball, I'll play. And I think it's fantastic you produce players with the courage to do that and the ability to do it.
We've got a picture of the Busby Babes up in the first team dressing room at Carrington because it's, you know, they were doing what we were doing 50 years ago and to a great standard, and they set the standards as far as we're concerned.
It's one of the reasons why we've got such a massive following, because, you know, people started following Manchester United around that time because of the exciting young players, and obviously then with the tragedy. You know, I think that's why we're so popular now.
For those close enough to see their genius, the memories of that great team will live forever.
They were going to win the European Cup. Not that year maybe, but certainly the year after or the year after that. They were developing so quickly.
In the 5 to 10 years after the crash, they would have been the greatest team ever.
What this club has actually gone through, it's amazing, really. Most clubs would have folded.
It was certainly a tragic for English football, because we lost many great players who would have, you know, been future international players.
Oh, we're proud to be part of that club with them players. It was so wonderful.
You know, poorer people like us that come from the slums, they made you feel proud and something different, and it was a fantastic thing. That how could I, or how could anyone that knew them or remembered them or followed them, how could they ever forget the Busby Babes?
I'm proud of him because he was a footballer, but he was a wonderful brother. He was a nice young man. It's a shame he only lived to be 22.
I feel proud. He played for one of the greatest sides in the world, and to me they are the greatest side in the world, so I'm privileged to say I'm his son.
I was delighted when he eventually proved what I was saying, that he was going to be one of the best players we ever saw.
They were dear friends of mine, and I will always be proud to be part of that. But there were other people in the aircraft that had mummies and daddies and sons and daughters.
To be honest, it wasn't football. It was the friendship, that looking after each other, but being together. That was the important thing. Tremendous people.
I've got the last line-up in my lounge, and I see it every day, and I think of them every day.
There's nobody today you can sort of say he was as good as him, because I've not seen anybody as good as Duncan Edwards. I've seen a few that's close, but not near Roger Byrne. Tommy Taylor, I always thought he was magnificent. So you can't put a closeness to it, but as a collective group, nobody would have touched me. Nobody at all.
With the team we had and the age we had,
they just gathered experience. I could probably sit in my office for about 10 years because it was all there.